Hey, church family. Before we jump into the teaching time, I wanted to take a moment and just share some church news with you. And today is Wednesday. That's the day I'm recording this video. And the reason I'm doing it so early is because you all know this is a big weekend for our church family. Today on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, we're going to have people gathering at our new ministry activity campus. We're calling it the MAC. They're going to be praying for a couple of hours to cover the project that we're launching tomorrow. We have another group who's going to be praying tonight at 7 o'clock on Zoom. That prayer covering is absolutely vital, and I'm really excited about people setting their hearts to prayer. We probably need to be reminded that it was prayer that brought us to this point. It was 40 days of prayer and fasting, and coming out of COVID, we were just asking for God to do something new. And he gave us an entire campus, and that was not on our radar. We weren't looking for that. Clearly, God had something new in mind. And so today we start. We begin with praying. Tomorrow we roll up our sleeves. We've got teams lined up throughout the project. And so I can't wait till February 11th. On that Sunday, we're going to be able to show a video of all that God accomplished and all the good that was done. We're praying for relationships to be built as people work together, and just excited about what God's going to be doing into the future. We want this facility to be usable by the kingdom of God for decades to come. And so you and I have this incredible opportunity to pour our hearts into something, knowing and believing that God will use it in the future to reach people we may never even meet. It's our opportunity to have that kind of a legacy investment. And so I'm just really excited about it. And I just wanted to say that before I got into the teaching so that my mind could be off of that and we can really focus in on God's word. But you got the bulletin. It was connected to the email that I sent. Take some time, read the bulletin, know what's going on in your church family so you can participate in those things that help to meet a need in your life or allows you to help meet a need in someone else's life. And so make sure you know what's going on in the church family. For today's teaching, we're continuing our faith Q&A series. We've started with the big question, the primal question, does God exist? Now, where we're going in the conversation today, let me just kind of set the table. All of us approach belief differently. And there's reasons for that, and I think very important reasons. Because that's true, it's really important that we be humble in how we approach faith questions, that we be very courteous and kind and respectful when we talk to other people who may see things a little differently than we do. I mean, ultimately, it boils down to love and how we love each other, how we receive each other, how we care for each other. And we're living in a world right now that is so utterly divisive, where people can't even talk to each other. And in this conversation, when we're entering faith Q&A, and we're talking about things that we're very passionate about, it is so vital that we approach it with a kind, respectful, and humble attitude that gives dignity to other people, even when we don't see things exactly the same way. And that's why I chose 1 Corinthians 13:12 as kind of a guiding verse, because it reminds us again and again, we only know in part. We only see in part. And what we don't know, what we don't see, should keep us humble. And that's incredibly important as we venture into faith Q&A. As I said right from the start, I'm really good at asking questions, maybe not so good at answering them. In fact, what I have found throughout my life is that I used to have a whole lot of answers, but then life happens and those answers kind of dissipate. And what we're left with is questions and humility. And I pray and trust greater and greater amounts of love and respect and dignity that we can give to each other. So, all right, so we're into this whole conversation now on faith questions. The first question we've decided to jump into is the big one. And the question is, does God exist? So on the outline, it says, this is the primal question of faith. Every other question we ask about faith is predicated on the answer to the God question. Now, the question can be asked more broadly, does a spiritual realm exist? The spiritual say yes, the secular say no. And so we understand the terminology. The term secular generally refers to anything that is not spiritual in nature. Now, I want to make something clear. No one can answer the God question for you. No one else can answer that question. I can't tell you God exists. You can't tell me he doesn't exist. This is a highly personal journey for every human being. The responsibility of answering the question falls on each of us. The way I often say it is, God has no grandchildren. You can't inherit your faith from someone else. God only approaches us as his children. It is a direct relationship to him. And so the answer to the question, does God exist, can only be answered by you. That's important for us to understand. And what we're going to be talking about in today's message is what are the elements of belief? What is it that leads some people to believe, and what causes other people to not believe? And then how do we respond with love and respect? How do we give dignity to people who just see it differently than we do? So let's go ahead. We're going to keep rolling. And let's unpack this a little bit. So why do I believe? This is an important question. There are reasons why we believe. And let me say right up front, none of us who believe in God got there on our own. Toward the end of the message, we're going to see that if we believe in God, the reason we even got there was because God helped us to believe. There is no boasting on my part that somehow, hey, I figured this out all on my own. No, the Bible tells us that we were all dead in our sins. Dead is dead. And the last time I looked, dead can't do anything. So if we believe, that belief did not begin in us. It began in the Spirit of God, who his awakening grace, we talk about this often, his awakening grace gave me the opportunity to believe, gave me the ability to believe. So there's no arrogance in this. And again, that brings us to that place of humility. If we believe, then we have to acknowledge, were it not for God, we wouldn't believe. So it leads us to a place of humility. And I want to keep coming back to that, because as we work with an ever-increasing secular world, we have to know how to approach that world with love and respect, how to give dignity to people who may see things very differently than we do. Basically, it's because we're acknowledging, I wouldn't even believe if God hadn't helped me to believe. So anyway, I just feel like that's so important in this incredibly divisive world that we live in. As believers, we have the opportunity to go through these conversations respectfully and gracefully. Just important for us to keep in mind. So again, the question, why do I believe? When considering faith questions, we tend to land somewhere on a continuum. So where do you currently land when considering the question of the existence of God or a spiritual realm? Now, I kind of mapped out a continuum there. On the left-hand side are the people who are just incredibly spiritual in nature. We all know them. They just believe. And everything that happens, they see the hand of God in it. They attribute the hand of God to everything. They are hyper-spiritually aware. I know I'm not that kind of person, because when I'm around that kind of person, I realize I'm not that kind of person. So on the continuum, those who are incredibly spiritual, that's that far left side of the continuum. Then the next step is what often is referred to as a seeker. Now, a seeker is someone who hasn't made the final determination as to whether or not God exists or if there is a spiritual realm, but they are leaning toward it. In other words, they're favorable toward the idea. And so the questions they're asking, the places they're looking, tend to lead them toward a spiritual understanding. And that's a seeker. A lot of times the people who come to church or listen to Christian radio or watch Christian programming on television, these are people who are seeking. They sense there is something and they're open to it. So they're seeking it, actively seeking it. Then, of course, the question is always in the middle. And today's question is, does God exist? Then moving to the right on the continuum, the next one would be the skeptic. Now, like the seeker, the skeptic hasn't made a final determination for themselves as to whether or not God or a spiritual realm exists. But they're approaching it in a way that they're leaning more toward he doesn't exist. And so a skeptic is going to research material and watch programming and listening to podcasts that would kind of move them toward what they sense is that God doesn't exist. And then, of course, the secular are people who they've made that determination for themselves. There is no God. There is nothing spiritual. What exists is the physical realm. What you see is what you get. That is the purely secular. And so all of us are going to land somewhere on that continuum. Now you see the arrows, and the arrows give you a little more fine tuning on the continuum. In other words, there are some people who are seekers, and while they really want God to exist, they kind of recognize that maybe he doesn't. So you see the arrow kind of pointing away from spiritual. Same with the skeptic. There are skeptics who, while they basically don't believe God exists, they really wish they could get there. And so that arrow points to the left. And so the arrows give us a little further indicator of where we might be in our own spiritual journey of understanding. And in the question, does God exist? In the answer. So all of us are in that continuum. We're going to bring that up again later in the discussion, questions that are at the end. But anyway, I just wanted to introduce that because we're not all the same. And so let me read a little bit from the outline. Why is it that some people find faith to be easy? Why are others so skeptical? Is it the temperaments and intelligences of nature? Is it the result of parenting, life experience, or education? Is it based in God's sovereign purposes? In other words, does God just make some people believe and other people he doesn't? Is it simply a choice of the free will? Is it all of the above? Is it none of the above? These are all very interesting questions that we then look at underneath the question of does God exist? And, when we talk about the temperaments and intelligences, these are kind of the hardwiring. We're all different. We know that. Some people are very outgoing. Some are much more introverted. Some people have very spatial intelligences, and they're very good at art or construction or sculpting. Other people, their intelligences may be more in the area of math or literature, but we all have unique aspects of our life that are kind of hardwired in. We didn't choose those things. They're a part of our temperaments and our intelligences. And then how do those weigh into where we fit on that continuum? And then, of course, that's nature. And then there's the nurturing aspect, like how much did my parents influence my ability to believe or not believe? What about the kind of schools I went to, the teachers I had, coaches, friends who have influenced my life, my own life experiences, and how I've interpreted what those experiences mean? These things all play into our answer to the question, does God exist? And because all of us have different temperaments and intelligences and life experiences, that means each of our journeys are going to be incredibly unique. Again, I think it's important for us to acknowledge this because when we find someone who believes things very differently than we do, there shouldn't be an antagonism there. There should be a desire to try to understand how they got to the conclusions they got to. When we listen to each other, when we learn from each other, we actually all grow. And in the conversation, within a dignified, respectful conversation, we may have an opportunity to bring someone forward on the continuum. We could help someone who's fully secular to maybe moving toward being skeptical. We could move someone who's skeptical to maybe being more of a seeker. This is the opportunity we have, but we only get there when we learn how to talk to each other, how to learn about each other, and how to respect each other. So, all right, I don't want to keep beating on that, but in today's divisive world, I think it's incredibly important that for us as believers, we know how to have these conversations without making it personal, without making it an attack. And I really want us to think about that. I think that's going to be absolutely vital in the next 20 years. All right, let me go back to the outline because we're going to read some scripture. So Paul addresses these questions about the spiritual realm in 1 Corinthians 2. Listen to what he says. And so it is with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I love the clarity in that statement. I came to you in weakness and with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on, let me read that again, verse 4. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. However, as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. Turn the outline over. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who knows a person? For who knows a person's thoughts except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. What we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. This is what we speak, not in words taught to us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. The person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, but such a person is not subject to merely human judgments. 4, who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. So what Paul is doing here is he's making it clear to us what I affirmed in the first part of the teaching. If we believe because God's Spirit has awakened us and empowered us to believe. He has revealed it to us. That's incredibly important for us to understand, because Paul's making the other side of that clear too. There are people who it has not been revealed to them. We, as believers, need to see and understand that. It then affects the way that we approach them. We so often approach people as they are rejecting. Well, rejecting is an emotional term. And so to say they're rejecting kind of puts them at odds with us, like we're in a war with them. I think what Paul's trying to say is, listen, if you believe, thanks be to God, because he's the one who gave you the ability to believe. If you come across someone who doesn't believe, hey, keep in mind, for whatever reason, up to this moment in their life, God has not given them that ability. I don't understand all of that. I can't answer the whys of how God works in some and not in others, but I do know this. If he brought them across your path, your conversation may be awakening grace that God is making available to them. And so we have an opportunity to be used by the Spirit of God to move someone on that faith continuum. That's an incredible thought to me. That's highly motivating, because even when I sit with someone who does not believe at all, I represent in that conversation God's grace being extended to them. That means that God is wanting to awaken them. How cool is that? And how cool is it that God would allow us to be a part of that? And so what I want us to understand is when we have those moments, instead of making that person out to be our adversary, we need to see them as potentially somebody God is awakening, and he's allowing us to be a part of that. It changes our attitude. It takes us out of being defensive and allows us to be healing and restorative and redemptive. That's this is good stuff. I could get all excited about that, and we could go in a whole other direction. But let's stay focused right where we are. So let's take a moment then to talk a little bit about how God helps us to believe and whether or not we're open to the things that he does. So we've probably all heard someone say, or maybe we've even asked, if God would just give me a sign. Have you ever thought that? Have you ever talked to someone and they said, if he would just show me, if he'd just give me a sign, then I could believe? Let's talk about that. There's just one problem with that statement. I'm on the outline. If you don't want to believe, no sign will convince you. Every sign can be explained away as coincidence, misunderstanding, hallucination, wishful thinking, legend. We see this, and we even see it in the theological world. There are plenty of theologians who just don't believe miracles happen, and so when they read the scriptures, they find ways to explain away everything. If you don't want to believe, you will always find a way to not believe. So St. Thomas Aquinas observed, to one who has faith, no explanation is necessary. To one without faith, no explanation is possible. I also like the way Stuart Chase said a very similar thing. He said, for those who believe, no proof is necessary. And for those who don't believe, no proof is possible. In other words, our belief or lack thereof becomes the lens through which we view everything. We see an example of this in John 6. So to give the framework, Jesus has a crowd. There's 5,000 men. We don't know for sure how many total people there were. It really doesn't matter. All the disciples had at their disposal at that minute to feed the crowd was a few fish and a few loaves of bread. So that's the context of John 6. So the crowds had just witnessed and personally experienced Jesus miraculously feeding the 5,000. They asked Jesus in verse 30, what sign will you give that we may see it and believe you? What sign? Wasn't the feeding of the 5,000 good enough for them? In other words, Jesus was challenging them with a new thought. He was making it clear that he was the Messiah, and they wanted proof. And he had just given proof. When you feed 5,000 people with a couple of fish and a couple of loaves of bread, that's pretty clear demonstration of the power of God that was resting on Jesus. So Jesus points out to them, I'm back in the outline, in John 6:25-26, that their stomachs had gotten in the way of their faith. He says to them, very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. So when they asked Jesus for a sign, he understood. He cut right through their motivation. Their motivation wasn't that he would prove that he actually was the Son of God. Their motivation was, hey, we're hungry again. How about doing that miracle again and really prove to us that you are who you say you are? They'd already seen the miracle. They had the sign they needed. Their stomachs just got in the way. In Luke 16:31, in the story of Lazarus and the rich man, I love what Jesus says to the rich man, because the rich man begs God to send someone back from the dead who would tell his family about the terribleness of hell and the beauty of heaven. And this is the response. If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead. The point he's making is this: if you want to believe, you will see miracles and affirmation of that belief everywhere. If you don't want to believe, you will never see an affirmation or a miracle, all based on where you want to be. So for those of us who are believers, we talk about it all the time. We're driving down the road, there's an incredible sunset, and we look at it and we're like, man, thank you, God. You painted that sunset just for me. We see the presence of God in everything, everywhere, all the time, because we believe. For people who don't believe, they look at it and say, it's just the sun and the refraction of light off the moisture that's in the clouds. And so the colors are just, why would you say that's of God? We can explain it scientifically. Well, the point being, if you want to believe, you'll see God's handiwork in everything. And if you don't want to believe, you won't see it at all. All right. It's important for us to understand how belief works, how it is awakened, how it is affirmed, and then the humility that we need to have when we have it, because the humility then makes us valuable as tools for people who don't believe, as God's awakening grace then is introduced to them. Okay, that's where I was hoping we got. Now let's look at the discussion questions real quick, and you'll have time. If you're with a group, you can take some time to talk about these. If you're alone, you can just kind of ponder them in your heart. Where do you land on the continuum of belief, especially regarding the question, does God exist? It's okay to be honest and open about where you land on it. That's, if you're a seeker, you're a seeker. If you're a skeptic, you're a skeptic. Listen, if you're with a group and the bottom line is you just don't believe, it's okay to say that. And it should be okay with the group that you said it. I've already explained why if you're a believer and someone tells you they're not a believer, that's pretty exciting stuff, because it gives you an opportunity to be a part of God's awakening grace as you love them and as you get to know them. So where do you land? Discussion question 2, can you identify the source or cause of your belief? It's great to talk about. I have some big belief affirming things that have happened in my life and how grateful I am. But you can ask the question the other way too. Can you identify the source of your unbelief? So why do you believe what you believe, or why do you struggle to believe? There's a story there. Number 3, according to 1 Corinthians 2:7-10, what kind of things has God revealed to us by his Spirit? We just read that. You have it there on the front of the outline. You can read that again and think about what is it that God has revealed to us. And then number 4, in John 6:44, Jesus says, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them. There's that awakening grace again, right? Like, we can't even approach God unless he draws us. We're dead. His awakening grace is one of the most incredible miracles. He draws us to himself. It's powerful. It's beautiful. So what does this tell us then about what we believe? Is it all about us? No, it's actually all about him, which again puts us in that incredibly humble and respectful place. All right, we're not answering the question, but I hope we're challenging some thoughts, maybe inspiring some new thoughts. I mean, that's the whole journey, as God awakens each of us. Take some time, talk together, enjoy time together, spend some time with God, spend some time praying together. Love y'all, looking forward to a big week. By the time you watch this, most of it will be over, but for me, we're right on the threshold of it. So God bless you, church family, and see you soon.